And welcome to the Crash Chords podcast, a very special episode this week. We have a very special guest for a very special purpose.
And he's so special, isn't he?
He is.
Oh. Tell us how special you are.
I'm amazing. I am.
That's not special. That's amazing. It's a two different.
I feel when people use the word special too often that's that winky special. He's special.
Oh.
He's, I
don't mean it that way. I'm not Gary.
All heads turn back to Matt. How do you mean it?
Our guest this week is Nate Ryder of the Average Intelligence Podcast.
Hello.
He's returned with us to do our very special John Williams episode.
Yes.
We had originally this idea and concept had birthed from wanting to talk about pop culture composers with Nate, and then we realized there's so much John Williams, we can't really talk about him and other people. We kind of just got to focus it.
Yeah,
so
you give him his
the
own
goal is to do more than one of these episodes with other composers, touch on Danny Elfman, even modern ones like Hans Zimmer. But for today, we're just kind of going to talk about John Williams on the whole. And we're also, up front, if you want to hear about Star Wars, not this episode. Indiana Jones, also not this episode. It's just there's too much just with those movies that we'd never get to anything else. So we're going to focus on the one-offs.
And then it would turn into a review also. And this is not necessarily a review, because I think if anyone thought we were going to criticize John Williams for his work, they'd probably hang us.
I mean, there's flaws. There's got to be flaws somewhere.
He's not perfect. But we shall get this out of the way. Star Wars and Indiana Jones are completely iconic. And not a single person in the world doesn't know the music, even if they've ever seen the movie.
Well, that's a good point. That's a good place to start off, because most of his films are kind of iconic. Perhaps not to the same extent as those two, which is why we're trying to stay off them at the moment. But either way, the thing about John Williams is theme. It always comes down to theme. It's always recognizable, almost instantaneously. It gets stuck in your head. Yeah. You whistle it on your way to work, on your way back from work.
And even if you go years without hearing those soundtracks, you go back and listen to them, and you remember it like it was the day after you heard it.
Exactly.
It's also because basically everybody under the age of 45 has been raised on his movies as well. He has been prolific for decades. This guy's forever.
Yeah.
He's almost timeless at this point.
In many ways.
He's the Beethoven of this generation, and I'm not even overstating that.
No, yeah. I think you're absolutely right.
And his importance to the movies he's worked on is indelible. If you were to take most of his movies and replace it with a different soundtrack, the movie is almost destroyed in many ways.
Well,
you can't separate them.
The idea of the opening crawl of Star Wars without the music would be boring and pointless. Yeah. Like, that sweeping score is what makes that intro so epic.
One of my favorite things is a teacher, to prove the importance of the soundtrack, showed a scene from a movie where, with a different soundtrack, where it was a woman just nicely swimming, and there's this nice little floral arrangement, but upbeat orchestral arrangement playing, and she's swimming and playing and waving to people, and it's like, oh great, and then she played it with the proper soundtrack, where it's dark until and everybody just goes, Gah!
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just a completely different movie.
It's amazing how little you need to recognize John Williams. That's the other amazing thing about him.
And that's one of the first things you really notice about him. He creates a signature for his movies. That's the only way I can really phrase it. Because it's a theme work that he builds into the entire storyline of the movie. Something as simple and as iconic as the dun from Jaws, to the sweeping bit of E.T., to the fanfare of Star Wars. Superman.
They're both fanfares in there.
Both fanfares, yeah.
They both have fanfare.
He creates an initial idea, and it's his signature move for that movie. It's a signature idea, and that permeates the rest of the movie. And in his sequel work, it permeates everything. It becomes the main idea.
Well, see, this is the thing. The ideal, I think, for any composer is to achieve that. As you go from film to film, you want it to have a life unto itself. Otherwise, it's not going to stand out in a crowd. So that should be the goal of almost every single composer out there. It's just kind of sad that not every composer is able to achieve it. Because of, I think, the inherent difficulties with composition and how much has to be done. The thing is, when you have all that, you end up putting all your emphasis, all your work into the instrumentation, into making sure that you want to put a violin section there instead of a flute section and all that other stuff. It's easy to lose sight of your theme. John Williams doesn't.
Well, we also talk about how, because we have done other soundtracks, some movies just don't stick with the proper theme well enough. Like, we had good things to say about the Wreck-It Ralph soundtrack, and that the score parts of it were very good, but there was not enough connectivity to the main theme. It fell short on some parts. Or like when we reviewed Pacific Rim, the problem with Pacific Rim is it all started to sound the same. It was too much reprisal of the past
we've only
styles.
reviewed 3 Impulse soundtracks, period. 2 were movies, 1 was a video game.
Yeah.
It's Pacific Rim and
Halo might have been the highest quality of all of them.
Perhaps,
it's
but even
tough.
then, the problem was still theme. Is
Yeah.
that you wind up going like, oh yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, that's kind of beautiful too. I guess I'm supposed to feel that this is kind of ominous and whatnot. But at
where's
the
this
end,
connection?
Yeah.
With a video game, isn't there going to have to be repetition because they don't know how long you're going to be playing a particular
Well, in
scene?
some cases, and actually it's permeating video games more, they're actually trying to create not just different parts of stages with different types of music, but they'll have silence. Silence is becoming a major aspect of a lot of video games.
Proper use of silence is very important.
Yeah.
Where if you want to create something that's high action, you introduce it with music, but when he's actually fighting, when they're actually doing something, the player is really only hearing the rat-a-tat-tat of the machine gun, or the explosions, or the swords clanging.
There was a soundtrack.
like that.
There's a soundtrack that I've wanted to bring up, and we're not going to go into it much here, but that I think Steve would like because it does have the very overture and reprisal of themes with the Mass Effect soundtrack. They have a main theme for Mass Effect that's very sci-fi and very much permeates the theme and kind of feels John Williamsy in a way.
Yeah. Dun, 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 dun.
You know, it's
Halo.
one of the,
They did actually do this sort of idea
of
of
course,
choosing
there's a main
tone.
theme at some point. The problem is exactly it's how it's stated in the end. Like, is it highlighted such to the end that you're going to repeat it throughout? Does it have the capacity to be repeated throughout without kind of getting a little bit tiresome after a while?
And a perfect example of where Williams takes a very simple idea and makes it the core is Superman. Dun, da, 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 dun, da, da. I mean, it is in every single part of that movie. You're hearing reprisals and reconstruction of that. Whether it's Lex Luthor, whether it's in the Fortress of Solitude, whether it's his running away from an exploding parrot.
It's the same notes in the end, same rhythm, but it can sound heroic, it can sound foreboding, it can sound romantic, it can sound harrowing, all of that by just the same melody.
Well,
that's skilled recomposition.
Yeah, well, recomposition is kind of his thing. I mean, that's how he's made such strong themes in so many different movies. You know, I mean, like, for example, and I want to bring up some movies because this way we can kind of flesh out our discussion a bit, because we're jumping into mostly his one-offs. Some of these movies had sequels, but the initial movies were the ones that mattered, or the ones that he composed for. Like, for example, my favorite John Williams soundtrack of all time, and a lot of people forget how impactful it was until you re-listen to it, is the Jurassic Park soundtrack.
Yes.
It is my favorite John Williams theme, and as me and Steve were listening to the main theme and then listen to the theme for the title of when they first see the item, Welcome to Jurassic Park, he recomposes that theme so beautifully so many times. Even though it's repetitive, it's brilliant every time because of how it's recomposed.
It's a lot of work with changing the instruments. That's one thing he loves to do, and it does a great job when you hear a cello instead of the violin playing something, or when you hear horns actually taking over a string section. It really changes the entire tone of the theme he has created. At the same time, he also likes to change up keys. Stating it in a minor instead of a major can do wonders to completely changing the mood of a piece. And
that's true.
Especially with Jurassic Park. I mean, Jurassic Park becomes one of those things where when it first is playing, it's inspiration. It's look at what science has achieved. And then later it's look at what science has achieved.
Yeah.
And then it's, oh my god, science is going to eat us. And it's
essentially.
Yeah. And
not in so many words, though.
No, but the fact that he does that with music, and again, using the same da-da-da, vague ideas, and then you change it up and make it foreboding or whatever. And Just some of it is amazing.
Well,
You said, like, even I would forget just seeing it in the theater for the first time, and the first thing, and you're like, oh, this is gorgeous. I want to live there. You know?
After some deliberation, I think I settled upon Jurassic Park as my personal favorite as well, only because it's so hard to choose between John Williams soundtracks. But I settled on this not only for the main theme itself, but also for some of the content within the deeper parts of the soundtrack, for specific scenes. Because, of course, you need to keep it original throughout as well. You can't just restate the same theme over and over and over again and recompose it, which he's still very good at doing. Either way, you have to come up with new themes. You need to come up with themes that, even though they may reference the primary theme, they're still very independent, fearfully independent.
Well, think about with Jurassic Park also, like, there's a song called Eye on Eye, or Eye to Eye. It's the iconic scene where the T-Rex can't find them because they're not moving, and then his eye is in the passenger side window, and the iris grows and shrinks, and it's just like, hearing that music, you picture that scene so well.
I think it was also used in movie posters.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's just like the idea that, you hear Duel of the Fates from Episode 1. Regardless of how you feel about that movie, everyone pictures that fight between Darth Maul and Qui-Gon Jinn. That fight was so well choreographed, and that song was so well composed. Regardless of how you feel about that film, that moment is still as epic as Star Wars ever was.
Yeah.
Certainly.
And this theme work also, one of my favorite aspects, because Superman is, if not my favorite, my second favorite of scores he's done. I really love the work that he does when he takes that Superman theme, that fanfare that represents the hero, and reinvents it as Lex Luthor's theme.
Showing the complete parallel to the two characters.
And it did something great, because that high fanfare, that high energy, that larger-than-life character got shown on its flip side as that high-energy, larger-than-life villain. The true perversion of what Superman represents, and the music reflects that.
That's almost an example of what I was talking about, though, because, yes, it does reference the primary theme, but it also is independent in the end.
And
you
expansive
recognize
on
it
its
as
own,
being
yes.
something individualistic.
Yeah.
And even though we said we're not going to go into too much detail with this, the Star Wars soundtrack did that as well. There is Luke's theme, and then there is the Imperial theme, and they are very independent, even though certain little phrases here and there may be shared between the two.
The original Star Wars is, as anybody who knows me on Twitter as Jedi N8, Star Wars is too important to me. And the first one, the original, the one that was just Star Wars until we made it A New Hope, that alone is beautiful to me and perfect. And yes, there is the main fanfare, the main opening crawl and all that, and then there's Luke's theme of hope and optimism, and
it's such a dichotomy. That's
right.
Literally what
but
it
also
is.
There's a bit of a depression in it, because he feels stuck. He wants hope. He has it. He's looking at the two suns, but at the same time, he knows he's stuck on Tatooine. And then from there, the other themes that get into there, to me, it's that one, and of course the Superman theme are pretty much shoved in my head as too important, and I can't. Like, if you want to see me cheer up, play that music for me, and I'll perk up, because I will love listening to it.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing about the content of these films. When you're comparing Star Wars with some of the other films that he's done, Star Wars, of course, is the epic. It's the quintessential epic.
Yes.
I mean, there is evil and there is good. So it's almost fun for him to play around with that dichotomy.
Yeah.
The obvious evil theme that anyone would have to be shut away from society for their entire life to not know that is evil.
Well, also the thing about Star Wars that's really great as a movie, briefly, is that it's that because we have to keep it brief or we'll never get to anything else, is that good versus evil in the first movie is so simple. It gets complicated in the subsequent movies because there's more to it. But that pure Luke is good, Obi-Wan's good, Darth Vader is evil, until you find out there are more lines, is so perfectly done that when the other movies introduce the father element and all this other stuff, you go, oh my god, yeah, well, now there's more to it,
He also does an excellent job of actually taking those original themes and blending them together into that high hope and low end scariness and doing such amazing things.
All that, though, is still keeping in line with the epic, essentially, for Star Wars.
Well, I ain't arguing that.
I think, but since we're already... Let's go back to truly the thing that made John Williams a name anybody cared about. And it has to be Jaws. The first blockbuster movie that came out. That's the one everybody will point to, because it was a movie that was just a shark movie, and nobody really knew it was supposed to be maybe a horror movie. But it came out in '75, and it blew people away. It was this gigantic summer movie. It created the blockbuster. Without Jaws, there would have been no Star Wars the way it was.
That makes a lot of sense.
And that kind of thing. And then when you realize again, his soundtrack alone makes that movie. That shark is not threatening without that.
Well, just a little bit of history here. I mean, of course, when you're talking about Jaws, that's absolutely true. It is the first blockbuster because you had a little history in the 50s and the 60s of movies that would come out released as thrillers, perhaps as horror films, obviously survival films. But the problem with some of the scores for these, kind of second-rate films at the time is that even though their only job was just supposed to scare you, so when you bring in a score, it often wouldn't be this grand sweeping score. It would be kind of a cookie cutter thing. Yeah. It would just fit the bill. That's why you could almost watch. Villain. Yeah, you could watch like 10 of these in a row and be like, I don't really remember the theme necessarily.
Right.
Some of them stand out, but that's how much work the actual composer was willing to put in for such a fleeting job. And then you get Jaws, and so much money went into it. They needed something that captured it.
Prior to Jaws, the only other soundtrack that stands out as special would probably be Psycho.
Yeah.
Oh, with the shrieking.
Yeah. Well, actually, the Alfred Hitchcock. See, remember, I'm talking about like grade B.
The grade B
side.
horror. Yes.
Alfred Hitchcock was on a different level. Those things,
That's true. It is.
They had their own history. The 50s and 60s is
the original House on Haunted Hill, even with Vincent Price, kind of a lame movie, and the music is just there to be spooky right now. And then, exactly.
No.
Oh, he's hanging.
Yeah. Well, the thing about also with Jaws is that I love is that theme, the Jaws theme that everyone knows, the fact that it just starts with what? 2 chords?
2 chords.
It is such...
It's 2 notes.
2 notes.
2 notes.
The fact that a man created... not created, but used 2 notes to create an icon and to scare the crap out of everyone is so brilliant beyond comprehension.
I agree 100%. That is the brilliance of John Williams. I could describe this straight on the air. Take any 2 notes on the keyboard that are right next to each other and alternate them back and forth, and you are a musician. You are playing the Jaws soundtrack. That's it.
And that theme, it's like, you're right. You play that scene where the woman's swimming without the Jaws theme, you have no idea what it is. But the minute you play that theme, everyone knows.
Yeah.
And stuff's about to go down.
Right. And that's it. Whether it's a shark or not, you know the minute the da-da plays that it's clearly not a good day for this woman. No matter how wonderful she seems right now, she is not ending this on a good note.
It also showcases another thing I saw that Williams does, which is he, at times, chooses an instrument for his characters, or an area of an instrument for his characters. And the only time he really represents that sound is when the character is interacting with his over score, his main theme work.
Of course, and that can't be any more obvious than those 2 notes being the shark. That's the shark's theme. When he's there, that will play.
There's more to that. When the other characters get introduced, they have their own instrumentation associated with them. He really doesn't just do one overarching theme. Everybody has their own theme.
Right, and we'll get deeper into this as we go from one character to another and deeper into the films themselves. But of course, we do know that the popularization of John Williams is mainly bent on that main theme. That's what everybody knows.
Everyone remembers the main themes from all... Like, when we were listening to the E.T. soundtrack, like, I remember parts of it, I don't remember parts of it, but when we listened to the end credits and they restated the main theme, I went, oh yeah, of course.
Right.
Which is why it's not only, magnificent from an artistic standpoint, it's also really great salesmanship. That's that signature that John's talking about. He throws in this main theme, and he intersperses it throughout the film. Again, that's what every great composer should do, but it's very easy to lose sight of that sometimes as you're getting really, really deep into, the nitty-gritty and all the little instrumentation quirks.
Well, you talk about composers also, and some of them very memorable for their work and the movies they're related to, but some aren't as much. But the thing about John Williams is the movies that he's involved in, you hear a part of it and you remember an iconic scene. Like, when we were listening to the end credits theme, I pictured boy on bike with alien going past the moon, because that's one of the most iconic scenes, A, in movie history, and B, for sure, in E.T.
Well, that's what we're going to speak to, the fact that Steven Spielberg has been a huge friend to John Williams.
Yeah, they've done so much work together.
Well, that's why
they work magically together. That's the only way to put it.
But you have to talk about the order of the way things work here. This is not like any other review that we've done, where you have an artist comes up with an idea, wants to release it as their own work. This is their own personal art. John Williams' whole career is based on working off of other people. The second you have a writer or director who comes up with their concept and gives the pitch, then it's John Williams' idea to make it come to life.
Yeah.
He needs to work off of that idea, and I think that's the real talent. Because we could all day we could talk about the brilliance of John Williams. That's the true brilliance. That's the core component. Knowing the plot, knowing the character, knowing it intimately, and then having a vision that he rings true to throughout.
That's a key that almost blows my mind when you think about it, is because you know the many people he's worked with. I can't imagine Steven Spielberg goes up to him and goes, I'm kind of thinking this scene might have a this kind of theme to it.
I kind of see him just handing a tape to Williams and going, make it better.
Exactly. Right, and that's and so he shooting this
happens
film
throughout other areas of the music world where people might not trust the composer, being like, I'm looking for something kind of like this, but John Williams, you'd take it for granted.
And then that's the weirdest part, because when they're shooting these movies that are now iconic, and the theme song and the soundtrack is so part of it, it wasn't there. It wasn't in mind when they shot the scene. It was, I hope they do something cool with the music on this part, where he really gets what I'm going for in this theme, in this scene, and
But of
John
course,
Williams has done that.
He didn't always have the credibility that he has now. Right. It had to start somewhere. I'm sure Jaws was a crucial turning point. And then Star Wars was probably the next big clincher in his entire career.
Well, he had done a ton of movies, TV stuff.
Oh, yeah, he did a lot.
Lost
quite
in
a bit.
Space and other things that I
But again,
can't remember
it was the birth of the blockbuster that made...
Well, yeah, Jaws, they've said in plenty of places, and that's why it got a video game and tons of sequels that stunk, is Jaws was the blockbuster. Or you don't even... I worked at GameStop when the Jaws game came out, and I went... So, you play as the people killing? No, you play as the shark. What?
Well, of course.
Well, because I want...
Because who wants to play as the people?
Nobody gives a crap about Quint. They wanted him to get eaten.
He was the main character.
Yeah.
But it's just...
Bruce.
But it's because that summer...
Bruce.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that was the name of the shark.
I didn't know
His name was Bruce. Yeah.
That was what they named
the giant animatronic.
the giant animatronic that didn't work.
Oh,
there's a documentary called "The Shark Is Still Working."
Okay.
That you should watch, because part of the thing is the shark was supposed to be all over the movie, but the damn thing kept seizing up and breaking because it wasn't built for being in water.
Yeah.
So they just made a fin.
So basically, yeah, Spielberg was like, oh, all right, you know what? I'll just show it as little as possible. That's why it's shot from the shark's point of view, because the shark itself ends up looking really fake.
It was the classic diver with a fin on his back, right?
A lot of things. No, they actually still. I mean, they would still use it, but you wouldn't have to use the moving mouth or anything. You would just have to move it underwater.
And see that right
to
there?
See the theme.
That's just so simple. The shark comes toward you. You have fear. You see the fin. I mean, imagine how many thousands, upon millions of sailors have experienced this in the past. You see the shark. It's coming toward your boat. Holy crap! What are we going to do?
That the fin thing alone has caused the death of a lot of dolphins. Because people see a fin.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
And they go, oh my god, it's a shark! It's like, oh no, it's a dolphin.
That's a shame. But they had different fins, but that's a shame.
Yeah,
but it's just...
if you're not paying attention, you just see a fin out of the water. You're not going to sit there going, no, the notch is completely wrong.
I'm not in the open ocean a lot, so, you know.
Yeah. Well, also the idea that Jaws, like, it was actually a problem. Jaws made sharks far scarier than they actually were.
Yeah.
They're carnivores, but they're not... They're not gonna kill people.
They don't seek out.
And if you're in a steel boat, you know, you're probably pretty good. You know, these weren't tugboats, little tugboats, right? And apparently the shark had a bit of a vendetta in it.
The truth is, if people
more people die from deep frying turkeys on Thanksgiving a year than in shark attacks across the world.
More people die from getting hit in the head
that year or in the future down the road from a heart attack.
Dude, we get like a couple.
No, there are a lot of people.
We get a couple dozen people a year taking a frozen turkey, throwing it into a deep fryer, and killing themselves
because it blows up.
What an answer to giving thanks.
That's more dangerous than sharks.
Because we're coming up on Thanksgiving, so why not get in the season?
It's, death by turkey.
John Williams has a fantastical mind, and that's why he was able to achieve a lot of what he was able to achieve.
It's just the idea
it's exaggeration. That's definitely part of the salesmanship,
people
too.
now, because of Jaws, that's why we always were reporting when someone's attacked by a shark. That's why we have Sharknado and Sharktopus and Shark to
and are you making the allegation that John Williams...
Sharkyopteryx?
Well, not John Williams.
Are you saying that he single-handedly instilled the fear of sharks?
The book and the movie basically made people a lot more scared of sharks than they need to be. Because as pointed out, sharks don't seek people out. Usually, if they do attack a person...
It's because they're bleeding.
No, that or because they're on a surfboard and they think they're seals. Because from the bottom, they see a silhouette, and it kind of looks vaguely. So that, because
they don't have the best eyesight.
Yeah, and they don't know what we are. We're not aquatic.
Well, slight pop culture tangent. I like the idea that because of Jaws and some other movies, Mythbusters actually tested the theory that if you punch a shark, it'll go away. Just watching that.
I remember that.
Watching Jamie Hyneman in a wetsuit with a breathing mask punching sharks was brilliant.
That is true. Anything that will screw up their senses, because they're mostly going by smell a lot of times.
Yeah.
Or some of them have actually a bit the ability to do electroshock kind of sensations, but it's all in the tip of their nose. A good punch of that will screw up what they're doing. It's effectively, it's kind of somebody slapping you when you're not paying attention.
It's a reset button.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the ultimate Mythbuster. It's like a fear buster. How could you just pop the bubble of shark fears?
Yes.
That's
of course,
awesome.
the joke is, sure, punch him in the nose, and if that doesn't work, hit him in the eye with your stump.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so
back to music.
Here's the thing. John Williams, he was able to achieve that with sharks. It takes some kind of vision to say, what is going to define a shark and define that fear?
As
I said, it comes down to...
Just the suspense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there is definitely salesmanship there, because if you're defining a generation, not that he necessarily set out to do that, but you need to make people think of that from then on. For people to bring it up in just... party humor. When someone approaches you from behind your back, you're going to play that theme. It gets a little bit ridiculous after a while.
That theme has been used
how much
everywhere,
it pervades.
Yeah.
Now, just to gloss over Star Wars really quick, there was a little bit of salesmanship there, too, considering that the movie... Again, a lot of people had doubts at the time that it came
nobody
out.
had done anything like that before.
All the actors were very, very ambiguous as to how this thing was going to turn out, considering all the ridiculous stuff they had to do.
You listen to the interviews with Carrie Fisher, she was like she talks about how they all had no idea what they were doing.
Each and every single one of them, when they sat down there for the premiere, they heard the opening theme of John Williams, and that's what sold them on the thing they had been working on for previous months. That's pretty astounding. Sure. That's salesmanship. He can clearly enhance a questionable idea.
I mean, there's so much truth in that. And jumping ahead to the modern before we go back, so John Williams' newest album is for The Book Thief, a new movie that's in theaters right now. I don't know anything about this movie at all, but we listened to a couple of tracks on Spotify of the soundtrack, and I kind of want to see it just because I love his music. And it seems like a very suspenseful and dramatic movie.
It's also
that's the purest of marketing. When someone who's as brilliant as him can make me want to go see the movie, I have no idea what it's about.
Which is it's also a trade, though. He's been doing it for a really, really long time. So at some point, you start to recognize what really does sell in the market.
Sure.
Considering it could be timing. A lot of careers in general do come down to timing. So there's that. Having talked about Jaws and Star Wars. Working with something that is challenging or questionable. How about something that is just a naturally good story from the get-go? And we have quite a few of those.
E.T.
E.T. I think that's a good place to start, considering time frame. We're moving into the early 80s.
Should we do
here.
Close Encounters first, or E.T. first?
I think E.T. is just an easier, better...
Also, Close
simpler
Encounters
story.
Rings some of the same points that I would make from Jaws. It's a very, very brief theme, and yet it's able to be recomposed,
Right, and
then you play it lower with the tuba.
Right, and I guess Close Encounters is meant to be too realistic. It's truly meant to be what we assume would happen
if aliens
to make
came
contact with
to us now.
certainly
Right.
from the 70s point of view.
Polar
but-
opposite of Star Wars. In that
Right,
effect.
exactly.
Yeah, sure.
So to get to E.T.
E.T. itself was supposed to be a on the fence as to what
A buddy film.
a sort of a buddy film, sort of a feel
It was on.
It is a
But
buddy
it
film. No,
was-
absolutely.
It was also a film to teach children to expand beyond their childhood fears. It was to actually help children grow
Well, it was
up.
also.
There's a lot of
They
dark...
added a lot into that movie. This is why I think E.T. is a really good place to move. Because, not that I'm even putting down Close Encounters. Close Encounters is a great film, but I'm not quite as emotionally attached to those characters as I am to E.T., to that kid.
A few people
To
are,
E.T.
again...
and Elliot.
E.T. and Elliot. The connection is so strong. This is what he has to work off now. It's a great storyline. All John Williams has to do is enhance it, and it's amazing.
Well, I mean, the great
It's
thing about
emotional,
E.T.
really.
also, when you look back at it, is it's a kids' movie. At heart, it was made to be a kids' movie.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of not kid themes in it.
Oh, yeah, you get...
Parts of it are terrifying.
And the basis of it is
Parts
the
of it are
basis
You
is
slow.
get divorce, you have fears from your mother, which is always kind of...
Alcohol.
Yeah.
the basis of it though is
government.
to not judge and to be and to try and be understanding and to expand your mind. To see this creature and be terrified of it, but then you realize it's just lost, it's just a baby, and to then try and help it. It's growing up.
That's
It's a
why-
metaphor for growing up.
That's why
what I
this is the
said.
perfect place to
That's-
go.
that's
This
what I
was,
said.
this
Yeah, but I
was a-
said it more concisely and where it made sense.
Well, you had more time than I did.
Oh, you're both pretty. So
Thank
you move
you.
into the next phase here. This is a movie that was written great, I think, from the get-go. I'm sure that there probably could have been other soundtracks written to this film. The fact that you had John Williams doing it is just like the perfect icing on the
This
cake.
is Spielberg's opus. Even he feels it's one of his most...
Oh, yeah.
To use the Elliot and E.T. up against the moon as a symbol for his own company proves how important it was to him. So yeah, the theme, as Matt was saying, that you automatically envision the boy on his bike and the silhouette. Whether either it's a beginning part where E.T.'s just showing off his powers, or where they're all escaping from the government with their guns, not walkie-talkies.
Or the attempt where the death and rebirth of E.T. You can
Still
you
the whole
Well,
thing.
Well,
when E.T.
also,
died scared
the great thing about
scared the
E.T.
crap out of me.
from a writing perspective is that Elliot, the boy, is written very... He has some character, but he's kind of a blank slate. And the reason is because Steven Spielberg wanted every little boy to go, that's me, I'm that boy. Not...
That's very insightful, actually.
And that's actually a precursor to a lot of video game story writing. Because a lot of video game story writing, the lead character in the early games was very one-dimensional because they don't want the character to be the character. They want you to be the character you're controlling.
Right.
And that's very much what Elliot was. You were Elliot,
This is
whoever
why I
you
gotta
were.
give some credit to that kid actor also, because he was able to bring out these certain reactions with everything that E.T. did, even when it comes out to the backyard scene and he
Yeah.
sees him approaching. His fears, it's very much like any little kid's fears.
Yeah.
You're curious at the same time, so you don't run away and lock yourself in your room necessarily, but you stay, you try to figure it out, but you're so hesitant because it's so unfamiliar. All of that.
that simple little putting down the little bits of chocolate and
Peanut butter. It was
No.
Reese's Pieces.
That's right, it was Reese's Pieces.
It was.
Yeah.
Strike that.
M&M's
reverse it.
wanted no part of it, and then they went, damn it!
Really? They didn't
Yeah,
want a part of
that's
it?
why he
they-
used Reese's.
Yeah, they
Because
went to
M&M's
M&M's,
didn't want their
They
stuff
went-
in the movie.
and they were like, no, we don't want an alien eating
Why
cotton
would they
candy.
decline that?
Because Steven Spielberg wasn't Steven Spielberg yet.
Again,
Ah,
yeah, and what did he have
that's
made
all.
at that point? He made Jaws, he made
But Close Encounters made a lot of
Close Encounters, but it was
Didn't
a
it?
weird sci-fi thing, and M&M's was like, we're not doing that
See,
yet.
That's weird. I'm sure people were on board with sci-fi by the early 80s.
Strangely enough, not even with
That was a
Wars.
late 60s.
Star Wars took off, but it wasn't the type
hesitance.
of thing that people were still... nerds were not cool back in
Nerds
the
only
early
became cool in the
80s.
last decade.
Right. So,
okay,
so to
nerds,
say...
but it was very apparent after all the successes in the 70s that you could do a great blockbuster
But also keep
science
in
fiction
mind,
film.
E.T. wasn't cute. E.T.
Oh,
was...
yeah, he was kind
he
of a
had the big
gnarly-
eyes, but he was he was designed to look... I hate to say it, he kind of looks like a scrotum.
Urge to be incredulous rising. It's trying not to be incredulous. It's just one of those things where it's like, You're telling me that, the movie studios and major corporations don't believe in a thing, even though all of the fans do? It happens all the time, even now.
He did it. He went there. He got incredulous.
I couldn't help it. It's just one of those things with, modern movies.
It was very apropos, though. Don't worry.
In modern movies, still, the superhero movies, even with Avengers, people are still only sort of backing, and there's still such a tight noose around it. Except for the major players in Marvel, there are places where, we should do this movie about this, and they go, well, I don't know if people will like it. You mean the hordes of people who are all over the internet saying how they like this thing?
Right. And it becomes a matter...
Incredulous Part B.
Yeah.
And the weird thing is, especially to step into the Marvel movies where they're doing the characters, for the most part, correctly. They're keeping them as true to who they are at the core as possible, and then they're like, well, how should we do this Superman movie? Dark and mysterious. It's like, but that's not Superman. He's not dark and mysterious. So it's that kind of thing where even the company that owns the character is like, whoa, Wonder Woman's too difficult to do. Wonder Woman! Are you kidding? You make Wonder Woman. That's how you do it. You just do a Wonder Woman movie. Yep. Do the character. She's an Amazon. She kicks ass. She's dressed in a bustier. You've got people behind you on that.
Well, that's the whole thing.
We did manage to turn this into quite the nerdy conversation.
Going back, there wasn't that lovable alien yet.
E.T. was the lovable alien.
He was
right. Started that
first.
Right.
That's right. Just to take this back, this is about John Williams, right? So John Williams, I guess maybe he too would have had some hesitance there. Because the thing is, who was more popular, Steven Spielberg or John Williams by this point? Probably John Williams.
Yeah,
he would probably have had a little bit more behind him. Because remember, we're leaving out a lot that we're choosing not to discuss, which is all the TV stuff that he did in the 60s.
Steven Spielberg was getting a name people were having to pay attention to him in terms of the fact that he was a powerhouse for making money, because at that point he'd also done Raiders by then. By the time he did E.T., Raiders, he did Raiders.
Yeah, Raiders was out first.
So people paid attention. The man clearly had a pedigree going,
Williams or Spielberg?
Spielberg.
Okay.
So they had to pay attention to him. Williams, at this point now, I think he was well loved behind the scenes. I don't know how many people.
Well, that's
in the industry.
How many people
in the industry he could do no wrong at that point. But I don't know how many fanboys. I'm sure the fanboys knew his name, but I don't think it was the type of thing that even this
also,
kind of thing.
That's it. Rule of thumb: how many people know composers' names anyway? A lot of people do not keep up on this thing.
Well, also the difference is,
in
a pre-internet age, Steven Spielberg's name was on every poster in every theater that every person saw. Yeah. John Williams' name was there somewhere, but not
it was
as...
a lot smaller, and it was at
not
the
as
bottom.
prominent.
That's my point. That's my point.
Yeah.
This is how people think of composers in general. They yes, the music is there, but unless you're really in the business, you think of it as that's the background stuff. You're focusing on the visuals. That's why people go to see movies. It's more of a subliminal thing than anything else. It's very, very important, and you take it out, it's very noticeable, but that's just not where people's minds go.
Right.
It's not a spotlight job.
Right. Of course, it was Superman, you will believe a man can fly, that kind of thing.
Right.
But also, and I think people were beginning to realize, certainly between the fact that there was really only a year apart between Superman and Star Wars, and that their main theme is a similar type fanfare. They're different, and I can tell you as a little kid, I would often blend them together by mistake, because they have very similar, very high in the trumpets, and the strings are in the same place.
That could have also been the case. It's his earlier work. Maybe he was, almost kind of copying yourself. It's common to bank off of what popularized you. So that could have been a marketing thing.
But also it turns out, with Star Wars, the fanfare made sense, and Superman. Even if you listen to the stuff from the radio days and the 50s, they would still, you could hear them giving him the trumpeted fanfare, where they were almost trying to figure out what John Williams did figure out.
Yeah.
For the Superman's theme. And then ever since John Williams made the Superman theme, past that, everybody's trying to write something that's indicative of it without being it, because they didn't have the rights to use the theme.
That's very true.
Well,
just another little side note about John Williams. Again, his influences, I think, are what's very important here. His influences really harken back to this late 19th century classical stuff, which again was not really what TV composers were doing around the 50s and 60s, they were really banking off of more modern stuff. It was very much like, oh, I'm going to copy what was done last year and just try to stay with the game. John Williams actually was able to achieve something much more impactful by going back further in time and, copying the stuff that Tchaikovsky was doing. You can find, like, ballet-esque work, because those were often very intricate pieces. It's very complex. That's what he brought to the blockbuster, which is probably why he's responsible for making the blockbuster. It kind of reminded people, this complexity really kind of affects me in a way. It adds to the complexity of the film. There's some weight there.
Well, it gives it a history in and of itself.
Well,
Exactly.
If there's one thing John Williams can do, and of course I would speak to this bit, he has so many songs he's created that when you hear it, you get a certain emotion invoked so easily, like within notes. It's not even like you need the whole song. I mean, going back to Jurassic Park, when we were talking about the Welcome to the Island theme version of the theme, the big trumpets and the big fanfare, you feel that sense of puffy chest pride, like, this is beautiful. It's beautiful!
Yeah.
And
you can almost put lyrics. A lot of his songs you can almost put lyrics to that would mean the theme. Look at the island there, it is beautiful.
It's
true.
That is how overbearing, in the best possible way, how overbearing that theme is.
Yeah.
But just to bring it back around, that's because at the same time he's also accessible.
Yeah.
Like, yes, he was going back in time and being very complex about what he was doing, but he's not inaccessible. That's the polar extreme of the stuff that was going on in the 50s and 60s. Some would be very straightforward and cookie cutter, and then the other extreme would be, the people who had moved so far along in the musical tree that they were doing this atonal stuff, like Penderecki, Ligeti. These were the composers for instance, the 2001 Space Odyssey soundtrack, which is not that accessible to a lot of people.
No.
Some people find it very grating to listen to.
I don't like a lot of Kubrick's soundtracks.
I do, but if it's a different branch of my
Oh no,
likes
I'm the
as a
same way. I'm
musician.
with Steve. I like it also. Like, I love Clockwork Orange, but it's
Right.
so different from
It's
everything
moving,
else.
it's eerie.
In this, I'm mostly talking about Eyes Wide Shut, which is
As an example.
The real reason that he retained this accessibility in his grandiousness was the choice of instruments. He would really just harken back to the core orchestra many times and then adapt it and change it up. E.T.'s a great example. The xylophone work, the harp work is really subtle. It's something that you even said, Steve, that you've kind of forgot about because you haven't seen it or heard it in such a long time. But
it's also the softer side of John Williams. For instance, when he brings out the harp, it's there's very little else playing in the background. It almost, at that point, you don't think grand orchestral soundtrack. You think something that might come out of more of an indie flick or something like that. Yeah, it's soft, but even then, you have that dichotomy between the grand theme and then the soft, intimate, emotional sequence.
Right.
You want to feel something there. Why not, go back to the bare bones instruments? A harp is a very, very
simple instrument.
Well, it's not simple. It's very difficult to play, but it's delicate. That's what it achieves.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But, I mean, speaking to the emotional side and the softer side, I mean, Steve took on the very daunting task of listening to the Schindler's List soundtrack, which John Williams also did.
Hey, I did too.
Okay, I hadn't realized you listened to it as well. I listened to the main theme and then couldn't listen to the rest. I couldn't do it. I've seen the movie once. It's one of the most heartbreaking movies I've ever watched, and the soundtrack's a huge part of it. Just listening to the main theme, even if you don't know the movie and just know the vagueness about what it's about, it's completely destroying. Heart-wrenching.
The main reason for this is it's violin.
Who's the
main
violinist?
thing
Itzhak Perlman. They
Yes.
got Itzhak Perlman to do this. Who
One of
was
the
one of the
greatest men.
best
One of the-
violinists in the world.
Yeah.
First of all, he's Jewish, so he had kind of a personal connection to the plot of the movie. And also, it's a fun little fact, he plays with the Stradivarius. There are only 200 of them in the world, and his Stradivarius is from 1714.
Wow.
And it is one of...
It's literally one of a
They
kind.
say that one of a kind. They say that these instruments, scientists have gotten together to try to figure
can't
out how
replicate
to
it.
reproduce this
Well, because-
sound. Something about, like, the weather at the time that the trees were grown when
Yeah.
the instrument was actually made.
Well, they were
literally
all of those were handmade. Those 200, right? That was long
that's the
before.
only way you would make them back then.
Yeah,
this was
and
one of the greats.
But that's why
and had a golden age.
That's like a
production.
minor angry white tangent. Is the fact that so many instruments now are processed is so aggravating because the handmade instrument will. A friend of mine just made a mandolin by hand. He used a mandolin building kit, so it wasn't completely from scratch. But he still built it by hand. And he said it was one of the hardest things he ever had to do.
I had professors in college who they would have their own guy. The guy that they go to, like, okay, maybe they didn't make them instruments themselves, because often it would be very complex to make. But I had a professor who was an expert on Renaissance-era instruments. So it'd be kind of things that have sort of lost use in a lot of modern music. They're not in the modern orchestra, but you would find them in like chamber and special cases. And he was kind of an expert in these instruments, so he would have this guy that he goes to make these instruments for him. Been making instruments for him for 40 years. Wow. So clearly he knows this guy's quirks. They have a relationship.
Yeah.
But speaking back to Schindler's List, you have one of the greatest instruments ever made.
played by one of the greatest instrumentalists ever.
In one of the most emotional
Did you ever watch them make him? He was very careful. You should have seen the weather of when they got together and had the sex.
This sounds like a very Jewish joke right now.
Well, it's Doc Perlman. You think
and also Nate comes from very Jewish heritage.
Yes,
but
I'm in a very Jewish neighborhood. I'm no longer. I'm Jewish, but I'm an atheist. So whatever you want to call me.
But the main theme of Schindler's List was whatever the violinist wanted to do.
Oh, it was, and like, what was we listened to the main theme and then something else. What was the other one that we listened to that was?
Here's the thing: the other most harrowing theme is Auschwitz-Birkenau, which was probably the worst camp by many accounts.
And it was also one of the most disturbing scenes ever.
That's the one where the allegations have been made that there were actual showers that instead of water coming out would be lethal gas. Yeah. And they would put into it and begin the whole extermination sequence. So the movie takes... I hesitate to use the word... I use the word tasteful lightly, but of course... They were trying to be as graphic as possible while also sort of turning it in the end, not quite showing, the death. Because, for instance, people around camps, they heard rumors about these things, even within the camps. Yeah. So they had the fears. The fears were already settled. And, of course, at the end, they go in there and they think that that's the last final moment, especially when the lights turn off. Yeah. And in the background, you have this harrowing violin sequence. It's a dark theme brought from... the recesses of Yiddish music that goes back centuries and centuries, and it's used very, very appropriately. The whole entire movie is using that Yiddish the scale.
Yeah.
But that was one of those movies that when we're looking at the IMDb list, because we have the internet now and everything it leads back to IMDb if it's related to movies. When Schindler's List came up, I was like, really? Schindler's List? I don't remember. But then the minute I listened to it, I was like, oh yeah. Even though it's not all him, and the violinist has a lot of influence in the sound, it's still very clearly John Williams. It has John Williams.
I would actually argue that a little bit.
Yeah.
It was much less apparent to me in this film than almost any other. Because I accept John's theory that there's a signature John Williams out there, but I think he was very out of his element for the Schindler's List soundtrack.
Well,
because he doesn't often use that scale.
Yeah.
The scale escapes me because it's not very commonly used today. It's a very case-by-case kind of thing. But it's perfectly appropriate for that film.
Yeah, for sure.
I never would have expected that he would do that. It's just, you'd think maybe someone who specializes in it.
He also does tend to actually work on the less dark area of movies. He doesn't... tend to go.
Yeah, he's going to heroic.
He doesn't do the deep dark topics like Schindler's List too often.
Well, and that's what I think he's revisiting. It seems like, at least from what I've read about the book Thief, is revisiting that kind of dark theme because it's World War II, it's Nazis again. So,
well, to some extent, he actually did revisit it in Saving Private Ryan.
True.
Which, while still lighthearted, because some of the heroes win in the end. It still had the idea. Someone survives. It still has that same idea of there's a lot of death and destruction, there's really Yeah.
It's the heroism that I think is what we identify John Williams with, and there is heroism in Schindler's List. Of course, Schindler is the hero,
Yeah.
but you don't get a fanfare. The closest thing you get to a fanfare in that film is, "I didn't do enough, you did so much."
Yeah.
That's the winning line of the film, and he's in tears the entire time. That's the closest you're getting to a fanfare in the wake of what had just happened.
Because there's no... Well, it's also a test in... isn't always a happy ending. It's just happier than it could have been, but it's still not happy.
It's really hard to be light and fluffy for the Holocaust.
And
that's why I think he's out of his element, because you look at almost every other film he's done,
there is that hope and that light at the end. That's true.
Yeah.
I mean, but then again, you could think about it. Empire Strikes Back had that dark note. I mean, that was one of the most depressing sci-fi endings. I mean, everything went wrong at the end of that movie.
No. There was still hope. That's the whole thing. At the end of Empire Strikes Back, it was the most depressing, I guess, of the Star Wars, but the bad guy didn't win. The bad guys weren't... They were winning, but they were not winning 100%.
It wasn't over, yeah.
Schindler's List, the bad guys were kind of winning 100% for the majority of the even concept of the idea.
That's the thing there. I mean, throughout Empire, you have these heroic sequences, where there is kind of a fanfare going throughout the battle on Cloud City and whatnot.
And even if you look at the very ending, they're trying to make it as upbeat. Yes, Han is taken away, but now we have Lando inexplicably wearing Han's outfit, flying off. We're going to find him, and Luke has now just gotten his hand replaced, and he's there with Leia, now pondering this information he's been given, but it's looking out to the stars. We're going to be able to fix this. We're that close.
That's the essence of the epic.
You're right, that's true.
I mean, there's no epic nature about Schindler's List. It's literally, it's non-fiction.
Hey, it's the Holocaust.
This
is wacky Holocaust.
There's no spinning this in a positive way.
No, of course not. You wasn't
Which
supposed
is
to
why,
be.
while
you couldn't, it would be blasphemous.
While Saving Private Ryan might be the closest conceptually, there was still the hope that they would do exactly what the movie says.
Because that was from the American perspective. So, of course, for us, there was a lot of, I mean, not in every case, I'm sure, but sure, we had that idea of, rah, go get them, march into Europe.
All of 3 people in the movie survive. But the Ryan survives.
Spoiler alert.
Yes.
People died in the World War II.
And Rosebud's a sled.
And Darth Vader's Luke's father, so there's...
No, he's not!
Yeah, he is. Yeah.
My favorite thing...
I looked it up.
Minor Star Wars tangent.
Can't watch it now.
I love how often the "I'm your father" line is misquoted, because it's not Luke, I am your father. No. It's Luke exposition. I am your father.
No, the actual line is no. I am your father.
Yeah,
and that's it. No, it's not even that they misquote it; it's that they don't get the cadence, which is kind of the important thing. It's no. I am your father. That's the whole thing.
No, you idiot! Right. I'm your father.
But then, I mean, we can get into misquotes all day.
That's kind of part of fandoms of anything,
right? Because it's easier to say Luke, I am your father. Because if you just say I am your father, everybody's like, no, you're not. I met my dad.
I know my dad.
Yeah,
he's not you.
Exactly. It's like, no, I'm doing that movie. Which the one Star Wars. Oh, in that Luke. Shut up. So moving on, because Scotty beam me up, or no, they did say Scotty beam me up. They never said beam me up, Scotty.
Right.
Didn't they?
Never
there's a lot of episodes
never
once
in the original in the original series, nor in any of the movies do they say beam me up, Scotty. They say to beam up, Scotty. They say Scotty beam us up. Any variations, but they never said that actual phrase of beam me up, Scotty. Same thing with play it again, Sam.
Well, paraphrasing, what you gonna do?
That's kind of how fans and movies work.
No, that's how the worldwide game of telephone works.
That's also true.
Right, and then there's people just getting annoyed at the other fans going, we know, stop it,
So now we're fast forwarding through time here. I think I want to return to Jurassic Park.
Yes. So the thing about...
I'm not done with that.
Well, the thing about Jurassic Park also for me as a kid is when that movie came out, first of all, Jurassic Park, I don't do as much reading as I should. I've been reading more books lately, but unfortunately I'd fall out of reading books just because... I don't know.
Because of life.
Well, it's also mostly because it's not my number one form of media. My number one form of media is music. Second is video games, and then I like reading
And
books.
all of these are time-consuming,
Right.
unfortunately. Yeah.
But the thing about Jurassic Park is that Michael Crichton wrote one of my favorite books. I love Jurassic Park. It's my number one. It's my favorite book of all time. Maybe only eclipsed by Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And it's just, when I heard they were making a movie about it, I was so excited. And when I saw the movie as a kid, dinosaurs in a movie?
Well, number
It had
one,
never been done before.
That
Number
were done
one.
well. That's
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
key. They've
Well, they're
been
done
done
well.
before.
It was the
they took an
level-
iguana and stapled a thing.
the
to
level
its
of
back.
technology finally started catching up to what people
Well,
wanted
they did
to
the
do.
they did the wide shots of the big dinosaurs, so you couldn't see the detail, and then the close-ups were all animatronics and brilliant animatronics.
Yeah.
When you go into the Toys R Us in Times Square and you see the T-Rex and
Yeah,
it
that's
roars the
awesome.
sound effect from the movie, it still gives me chills.
I don't know, but the old
fix
guy
it.
with the suit on had such an appeal, though. Don't you
Yeah,
think?
oh sure, like in the old King Kong and Godzilla movies with the
Godzilla,
claymation.
That was yeah. Stop motion is not the guy in a suit, but the guy in this. I don't know. Godzilla is Godzilla. You can't. You gotta love. him.
Actually, truth be
You
told,
get what you pay for.
they released a trailer for the new Godzilla, the new Japanese-style Godzilla.
Yeah.
I'm kind of excited.
I will see the new American, but
But it's in the Japanese style instead of the
I-
Abomination.
I was very young when the '98 movie came out, and it excited me once.
It was.
You know,
It was awful.
The trouble
Oh,
is the design.
I was
on,
10.
The design on
Ish.
Godzilla was awful, and the movie was dumb, which is sad. Because part of the
course it
problem
was.
is Godzilla movies are almost supposed to be dumb.
Yeah.
Because blockbusters,
So does, but there's
blockbusters go full
fun
circle.
dumb.
Yeah.
There are the great blockbusters,
Yeah.
and then there are the.
Yeah.
Then
But
there's
that-
Crank.
That wasn't very well thought through for all
The
its money,
funny
was
thing
it?
is, Japan has been able to make fun, interesting, entertaining Godzilla movies that still maintain the dumbness that was always inherent, even when they were being metaphorical. You know, the whole thing. The original was about
the dangers
pollution.
of nuclear.
no, it was nuclear problems. It was
Yeah.
a problem with the atomic bomb because it was
Yeah.
in the 50s.
I got problems
you know.
with when nuclear ain't one.
No, it was the
Ugh.
idea that
99
nuclear
problems with nuclear ain't
mutation.
one.
They were afraid that basically
Nuclear mutations would lead to
One of you was saying it
100-story
right.
tall monsters eating us.
right,
there's
and
so
basically,
many.
it basically was, you know, hey, let's not use the atom bomb.
Yeah, it was
together.
right after Darwin and atom bomb,
But-
so
but-
they just put the two together.
Diving back into Jurassic Park.
Right.
I don't.
That's why it was such a great thing. Really, it's analogous to Jaws in the same sense.
Yeah.
You know, to see it on a large scale, this is what animatronics can do now.
And
Well,
of
and
course the
also-
CGI, when you finally see the T-Rex running with the proper gait, where it, because originally we had thought T-Rexes stood straight up with the tail dragging on the ground, and then around this time
They
we
figured
realized
out they run like birds.
Forward.
they run like birds. We realized the way their hips were positioned that they were actually forward, and they were now effective predators. Even though people think they're scavengers, but they're predators for the sake of our argument right now. So that they are leaned forward, and those arms are almost completely pointless. But they could now actually grab little things nearby because they're closer to the ground.
But I am going to make a claim here because there was a little bit of unbelievability about it. I mean,
Well,
yes, perhaps
the
compared
fact that there were
compared
dinosaurs
to
alive in modern times, yeah.
no, the animatronics. Even then, it was not quite up to par for that. What we got, I think, even between the early '90s and the late '90s, there's huge advances, huge. And I think that's one of the reasons why it needed a little bit of oomph, and that oomph came from John Williams.
Yes.
The second you hear that theme, when the giant brontosaurus is in front of your face, in the journey to the island sequence
Yeah.
and whatnot, it's overwhelming.
Oh yeah.
Brachiosaur.
Yeah.
Or
Was it Brontosaurus?
It was a
a
Brachiosaur.
gala,
The Brontosaurus doesn't
Gala,
actually
Gala,
exist.
Gallimimus.
Gallimimus.
Look how they move like a flock.
Yeah.
They're flocking this way. Or the scene,
The Deinonychus.
the entire scene work
Oh, thank
of the kids and the raptors, which aren't actually velociraptors. Velociraptors are a lot smaller than that. Those are-
Actually, originally they were Deinonychus, and they were very small. They were maybe 4 feet tall at the tallest. Later, they did actually find specimens that were taller, and they named them Velociraptors, so we can have this argument.
Oh, okay. I
They-
always,
they-
I always knew them as the 2.5,
Yeah.
3 foot tall ones.
Yeah.
Anyway, the entire music
By
that was
mistake, they were
there,
correct.
the entire and the use of silence. That was probably one of his best things he did in that.
Yeah.
The use of silence to punctuate the horror, and then to bring in the score.
Well, that's there's that, of course, when the water
Yeah.
in the car,
Yeah.
when the glass of water starts to ripple a little bit, very, very soft at that point. All you hear is a tiny, soft little flourish going with the upright basses and the cellos, the deep strings just going, right, as you see the ripple. And it slowly starts to build a little more. It's even that is sort of a theme. A little bit in a way.
Conceptually,
Wow.
Yes. But just in the way of building up that there is a terror approaching you.
Well, just like you mentioned with the title sequence and
The title sequence.
what was it, 30, 40 seconds, something? The very first track on the soundtrack is literally just the title, and the Jurassic Park icon is so haunting and beautiful at the same time. It's
Richard Hammond really did not get a good publicist when designing the theme for Jurassic Park. That's
You're gonna have the chilling and ominous thing for your theme park for children.
you don't use. I mean, T-Rex is iconic, but you don't make him that monstrously looking. Come on, man.
I like the logo. I thought the logo was solid.
Yeah.
But of course, that's the achievement of the film, is that you're looking at this logo, which is kind of appealing, right? It's got that prehistoric
It's
feel to it.
it's got that,
And then the
black,
background,
red, white.
the music is so haunting. I honestly would say it's one of the most haunting things in the film.
Yeah.
And this is the first 30 seconds. It's ominous. It actually uses a kettle drum alongside, I think, an upright bass. And then some variety of flute that is made to sound very prehistoric, like something a caveman would have used or something like that. And it all just functions to provide this 30 seconds of, you're gonna get some shit going down, you know? It's coming up.
But the great thing about that is it's so haunting, and then it's into the theme, which is not. It's uplifting and inspiring.
Well,
which
that's
is so
his
great.
balance between the foreshadowing and the majesty of there being dinosaurs. Because it's still something that you really, really want to work.
Of course.
Throughout it, you want the dinosaur. You want the park to function. It's something that you would love to go to. You know, if you ever got a ticket, you just don't want there to be any accidents. You know, and any Dennis Nedrys.
Well, it's that idea also that some of the most beautiful and mystifying things can also be some of the most terrifying things.
Of course, that's the majesty of life.
Well, it's like
It's different.
No, it's the idea of beauty. Horror is still beautiful in its own way.
Right.
Fear is still has beauty in its own way, because the idea is we don't know.
I don't even think it's horror at that point. When the main theme comes out, that's not even horror. That's looking at.
I was talking about the movie, not necessarily the music.
Oh, okay, all right, that's fine.
It's the idea of the unknowable is both scary and beautiful.
Yeah.
Both of which are the main... unknowable is a main component in both those ideas.
humans by nature can be equally
Williams
intrigued.
figured out how to do a short little 10-second little... or well, not really that short, but a little 30 seconds of music, and to take that same idea and transform it over and over and over again to represent both.
Yeah, that flute sounded beyond ancient. It really is something that separates you. It tells you just in 30 seconds that these are two things that should not coexist. You know, they're separated by 65 million years. That's about all the information you need. Either way, you want it to work because it's just so cool. And that's what the theme achieves. So it's kind of diluting you for all its majesty. It's diluting you for the course of it. When you're introduced to the Brontosaurus or the Brachiosaurus, it looks so good.
Yeah.
Right. Well, also, speaking of these dual themes, a song that Steve pointed out to us that we listened to before we recorded, there's a specific theme for when the baby raptor's born.
That's what I want to get into.
And that song, just from the first 10 seconds, is both equally parts beautiful and horrifying at the same time.
This, to me, is really the true brilliance of John Williams. I mean, I love the fact that he can write great themes, memorable themes, in almost every single film, make each and every one memorable in their own way, and tied to the theme, tied to the character. But it's these little sequences here that are, I think, the crux of his talent. It's like you said, it's simultaneous. It's not trying to convey just one thing. It's not that black and
It's
white,
not
like,
alternating
here's
either.
ominous, and here's... It's one theme that is simultaneously miraculous, because you're watching the birth of a raptor, right? But it's also, you're watching the birth of a raptor. This is something that will eat you in due time. Right now, it's very cute. Which is the same thing you would get from, any birth, like the birth of a baby tiger, or a baby lion. But this is something that is so separate from you this is something so early in the evolutionary tree. It's it's that mixture of science with majesty, with ominous, all of that just mixing in this pool of terror. It's really fantastic.
It is one of the more brilliant pieces I think he's ever done, just because you immediately, from an emotional standpoint, the minute the song starts, you feel both. It's not one or the other, you feel both.
It has the implication of us playing God. I think that's really what it carries.
Which is, of course, the main theme of the movie, and anyway.
Of course.
That, what are we doing here?
Why are we...
Life finds a way.
Right.
That's the turnaround moment. I think that even if you were deluded by the opening sequence and the beautiful big brontosaurus and everything, I think this is really the turning point. When you see this birth, this hatching, it really is supposed to be like,
It didn't help that half an hour ago you were just explained how the Velociraptor is the most dangerous thing that ever walked the earth. That it has a claw as big as your forearm, and it'll just hit you and gut you. And it was smart. And that was the whole thing. It was smart. Yeah. That was the scariest part. Because we think of animals, and they're dumb. And the only smart animal that's scary is people. But this is armored. This has got weapons built into it, and it's smart.
And it can outthink you. It hunts in a particular way. It actually knows how to distract you.
And it's... get you from the side.
Right. I think the reaction of that Asian scientist really helped also. With the whole, you bred raptors? And he just nods slowly.
Well, that movie...
I have to say, that movie made me scared of velociraptors for, at least 3 or 4 years.
Oh, for me, I had nightmares about the T-Rex roar. I would wake up hearing it and just...
T-Rex. The funny thing is, in the movie, the T-Rex becomes the hero.
Yeah.
And it's big, it's lumbering. You don't get snuck up on a T-Rex. That was the whole thing.
It somehow manages
raptors, but still, that scene with the rippling water and the T-Rex slowly approaching them, and then them having to not move, that use of silence with the low rumble that Steve was talking about before is just as iconic.
And then the stupid girl just flashes a light in his eyes and is like, oh, well, maybe I'll eat you now. There was movement.
There's something in there.
Well, of course, when a large animal is present on screen, you're not going to have quiet music to accompany that. It needs to be lumbering, and I think that's the only word I would use to describe the main theme of the film. It is kind of lumbering in a way. I see flocks of large creatures.
It's graceful but deep. It does have grace about it to represent the elegance of this ancient beauty. But at the same time, it does have a very deep idea, because these are quite literally larger than life. These things are stories tall. These are the biggest things that ever existed on land. And we don't have anything that even comes close to it to conceptually think about.
Yeah, and there's another thing that I think they used to achieve, that John Williams used to achieve that effect of being sort of ominous, and that was the choir. Again, he uses this kind of sparingly throughout his work. He usually sticks to the core orchestra, but he brings in a choir quite readily throughout Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
It definitely is present throughout. It's a very high soprano choir throughout the baby's hatching. The raptor hatching. It just lurks in the background, just between maybe 2 notes or so, and all the while it kind of makes you a little unsettled because it's kind of dissonant.
Yeah.
Same with the 30-second opening. Also, choir, that was more of a deep, rumbling tenor, I suppose. And I think that also, it was even more dissonant than the one in the Raptor sequence. So again, working with dissonance and the human voice, that can really creep you out. Yeah. Especially next to all this, you tend to separate the orchestra and the human voice. The second the human voice steps in there, it's like things got real.
But that also speaks to what I spoke of before. Besides the signature that Williams can do, he also knows how to make someone translated into music. Make an idea translated into music. Create a theme work just for A, just for B, just for C. Mm-hmm. For Han Solo, for Luke Skywalker, for Indiana Jones. For aliens, for monsters, for beings we don't understand, and for us. He knows how to make a theme work for a person using pure instrumentation.
An example for that in Jurassic Park, that's Hammond himself.
Yeah,
he has a theme, and it is very prevalent in the point where he starts getting very nostalgic, and that's the Petticoat Lane. And he starts describing the very first theme park he ever opened, way back in Scotland, right? And it's such this sweet little idea, compare that next to Jurassic Park in terms of vision, that you get this theme that is completely independent, not necessarily related to the main theme, although again, there may have been little hints and phrasing here and there, and it was just this little chimey thing. You can picture a carousel going around, because it's the naivete of how he views the world, that he could just take this and package it into something that is sellable and theme parky and kids
and not dangerous at all.
Yeah.
Fun.
It
Probably
shows how
unlikely
he
to
stole
eat
the
you.
child.
Yeah.
I have an example of that, and I'm going to throw back to something we talked about earlier: the wild signals from Close Encounters. It was unusual, discorded, kind of just conceptually out of left field. It was to represent the aliens. A lot of the high-pitched noises, a lot of the high-pitched tones of Close Encounters is designed to be discorded with the rest of the music to represent these aliens, because he's imagining them as unable to communicate with us.
Something that you can't understand.
And that's why I think Wild Signals is one of the most interesting things he's done, because it really is a duality between high-pitched and low-pitched and the melding of the two, and it really gives me the idea of what it portrays in the movie of them trying to communicate. And it's an incredible, just simple tonal composition.
Yeah. Can't even deny that. I mean, it's when it comes to Close Encounters, that's just inherently the theme.
Yeah.
So,
And it's not even the main theme. It's
a sub theme.
Yes, it's something kind of separate, the same way the raptor birth is. It's just conceptually
supposed to
so
unnerve
beautiful.
You. And yet it's supposed to unnerve you.
Yet familiar.
Yeah.
The repetition is what just keeps driving home that it's familiar. And the way one plays off the other and follows it, and they play in unison, and the low end misses it, but the high end goes on, and then the low end just goes dun dun to catch up.
Yeah.
Like, it's playful, yet definitely
There's a familiarity
untouchable.
with this Petticoat Lane thing, too. Just because I don't think anybody hasn't been to a carnival of some kind.
Yeah, sure. And it's supposed to have that carnival feel.
Yeah, and because it's so cheery, I think that also hints that you want it to work. You still even want the park to work, especially when you see him lost in thought.
Yeah.
It was his dream. It was a very naive dream, but it was a dream.
And it was intended to be a learning experience for everybody. Like, now we can actually watch these things as naturally as possible.
Yeah.
See how they actually react.
Well, it was a learning experience,
Well,
all right?
again, I have no idea why when they figured out why when they bred one raptor they went, let's breed more. I don't know why one raptor wasn't enough for them, because it's a killy, bitey, stabby kind of machine, animal thing, and you're like, maybe we don't need a pack of them.
Well, they also bred, a dinosaur that spits acidy glue.
They didn't know it spat acidy glue. They thought,
that's true. That's true. DNA doesn't just tell you that.
Yeah.
Dilophosaurus?
The thing is, Dilophosaurus, it was one of the best revelations in the book, was because they wondered, just from its makeup, they knew it was a carnivore.
But they didn't know how.
But they didn't know how it would be an effective hunter, because it didn't look very threatening, and then they realized, oh, it's poisonous. So that was kind of a happenstance. Why they bred more than one, I don't know. But they did.
That's the whole foolishness of the park thing. It's like, all right, that's a great thing to find out in a lab and whatnot, or in a very, very super enclosed facility.
Yeah.
But you're gonna run that little test, like, oh, it's poisonous.
Let's make a few more.
And not just a bitey
Let's not even put a fence
a
there.
spitty poisonous.
Go up and pet it.
So, as much as I've enjoyed this love fest of John Williams...
I do have...
Wait.
Oh.
So, we can't only talk about the good. Because he's not always done great things or been associated with great movies.
Yes, he has.
So he did the soundtrack for AI, am I correct?
I know why you're bringing up AI. He did do AI. I enjoyed that movie, and I know I'm the only one here who enjoyed the movie.
I enjoyed it up until a point.
My biggest problem with the movie...
The aliens...
I felt the added half hour...
was really shoehorned.
Yeah, and I felt it kind of killed what would have been a much more poignant, natural place to end it.
But my biggest problem with it from the John Williams end also is his music is very much John Williams, and you expect a certain thing. And the problem was, that movie was Stanley Kubrick, line. Big, bold, black line, Steven Spielberg. Like, it's just so obvious, the split, that John Williams music, I felt, didn't hold it together and in fact polarized that separation.
Well, I don't think that the music did that though. The music was just as strong as it was in any other film, but you're not remembering it as much because you were just too focused on the discrepancies.
And
guess
the big
that's fair.
thing I will attest to this to the end of the day is that his music, while yes you can definitely tell when listening to the soundtrack where the flip happens, I still found it to match up with the scene work with the actual movie.
Oh, of course.
Immensely well. And one of the best things he did was he was doing full orchestra work, and at times I thought I was hearing electronic tones. He did something magical with that orchestral work in that movie, which, while not as iconic, possibly because the music was not as good as some of our favorites, but I think it's more just the movie itself.
This was more of an artsy film.
Yeah, and it was beautifully artistic. I was extremely impressed with the way he seemed to oscillate the strings. Not just they weren't just strummed; they were oscillating like a robot, and it gave some great theme work to the movie.
I think that's fair. Is that
remember the music too well.
I'm being harsh on the music mostly because I was so distracted and distraught by the movie that the music fell short.
Right, but that's unfortunate because they're unrelated.
Right, and you're probably right.
That's the same unfortunate thing that we ascribe to the Star Wars prequels. John Williams was as strong as he ever was, but the
movies were not good, and that's fair. But you know what? Unfortunately, these things are so heavily tethered together with how you describe how he works that if the movie's bad or unenjoyable, because bad is relative, but if I didn't enjoy the movie, enjoying the music is going to be very difficult.
But it did...
Just like bad, unenjoyable music can ruin a movie, also the other way around.
Sure.
And one of the tracks, I believe, was called Replicas, did a good job of showcasing a trick that... I guess it's a trick that Williams seems to do, and that is to take deep tones and to treat them as the idea of the mundane, and to use high tones to promote a feeling of wonder. And in Replicas, he was trying to get across a scene that was explaining these kind of human, almost looking human, just off robots. And he did a great work of fusing the deep tones he was working into just this great high end that he had already been portraying in the movie.
Well, see, that to me just says that he's an astute composer. Like any other composer should be astute in determining, what sounds are really going to affect people in a certain way. Of course, high tones should probably achieve a sense of wonder, unless they're played in a dissonant manner, then they can kind of be a little eerie, or a little askew. That's not necessarily, that's just knowing your audience at that point, and just knowing the way culture works after a while. We get used to certain things over the many decades that we get them. So we can thank early composers for setting some of that standard. John Williams is following in those footsteps, but he is setting some new standards of his own.
Sure.
I mean, with certain things, though, there is also, psychological proof that if you play something in a minor key, you automatically think it's depressing and sad, whereas if you put it in a major key, suddenly it's amazing and happy. There was somebody who played, you can find it on YouTube, where they took music that is typically very... what was the music? I'm blanking on what it was, but they played it in a minor key, and suddenly it sounds, upbeat and happy, even though it was, originally I wanted to say something out loud, I can't think
death
of
metal?
Which, not death, no, it wasn't death metal, it was
emo punk?
No, it was your typical, actual classical music,
You tell us, we'll put in the comments.
I just don't even remember, but it was,
to be added.
Dun 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 dun.
You can do it with almost anything, to be honest.
But when you play it in a major key, it becomes almost happy and upbeat. And I want to do a search on YouTube right now just to find it, but I don't want to take the time out of the actual podcast.
It's fair. We can tack it on later or post it on the Facebook page.
Yeah.
But
when you get exposure to these things, again, society just gets accustomed to certain sounds, and yes, there is the core scientific reasoning as to why certain sounds do that to us. Of course, playing around from one mode to the other is an exploration into many other types of emotions, which are infinitely more complex than simply happy or sad. And John Williams is capable of all that.
He knows. He knows almost to the T exactly what tone's going to evoke what feeling.
That's
At this point,
he knows the story. He sees the story. He sees the pitch. He talks.
He's a visionary.
Yeah. Sometimes he talks with his director. Sometimes he doesn't have to. Sometimes he just gets an idea based on the pitch, and then it's He's
I'd
a visionary.
imagine at this point, a lot of people who work with John Williams go, "Hey, John, do your thing." I mean, he's definitely
sure.
the name, and I mean, there are other composers who are big names, but he's probably one of the biggest. I mean,
I don't know if there's anybody bigger. Just to put down the number of blockbusters him
Modern
and Spielberg
composition,
put together.
no.
Yeah.
You have some. Danny Elfman is really, really up there.
and I mean,
So
there
is
are
so is Hans Zimmer, even
but
though
he's
I'm
more
not a
modern.
big fan of Hans Zimmer's
But
work,
he's
to be
more
honest.
modern, and still he doesn't have the catalog that John Williams does. Hans Zimmer has great stuff.
And
but
in the end, I think he's more akin to the 50s, 60s composers in that regard. I think he's very, very good at cookie cutter things. I'm not saying everything. Some stuff I'm sure stands out, but a lot of what I've heard, I can just think, all right, that's your typical action sequence. That's your typical, character is sad or a little bit downtrodden.
thing,
Right.
It's not unique to the thing at play. You could just put it in any other film with a similar type character, and it would work just as well.
The same thing like Alan Silvestri, who also gets a lot of the big action. He did Avengers, I believe.
yeah, he did the scoring
and-
for Avengers.
And Avengers has some good themes in it.
I mean,
it still doesn't. A lot of it doesn't stand out. It's not in the forefront as much.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, the reality of it is also, I mean, you take Batman for a specific example, where you have Danny Elfman and then you have Hans Zimmer. Danny Elfman's original version Danny Elfman did the first Batman, right?
Well, the 89
I believe-
one.
yes.
Yeah,
yes.
the
That's the first Batman. Yeah, 80.
Michael Keaton.
Yeah.
So that theme is very iconic for very much. It's a very much the theme for Batman. You associate that theme to Batman.
It
Whereas
was the new Adam West theme. It replaced that almost instantly.
Like
whereas
Gothic.
for Hans Zimmer's theme for Batman in The Dark Knight, which was the best soundtrack of the three movies, is memorable for the hero and the villain, but the hero and the villain themes didn't have to be their themes. If you put a renegade cop and a psychopath that weren't Batman and Joker in that movie, the music would have worked just as well. And that speaks to the cookie cutter
Yeah.
style.
I agree. And
which
that's,
isn't
and that's
necessarily...
probably the better of his work. So,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which is, I mean, it
Williams-
wasn't bad, it's just, it really speaks to that.
And speaking of
He's
one
still a skilled composer. I'm just
Of
going to
course.
put that out there. But it's like I said at the very beginning. I think he focuses more on the interim. It's not so much about, taking the big theme and then interspersing it throughout, which really is what is the selling thing. Instead, he's just composition. Work it into scene by scene by scene by scene, which just doesn't always hit home. It's respectable.
Do you know if Hans Zimmer did Inception? Offhand?
I think so,
Okay.
but I
well,
can't
just
say
because
that for sure.
that would be the only one I would say of his work that didn't feel as cookie cutter.
If that's
Because
if
that
that's
theme
true,
was so penetrating.
If that's true, that was definitely on the better side.
I want to go back a little bit to talking about the way Williams understands his characters.
Okay.
When we were talking about AI and a little bit after that. And I want to talk about one movie that to be honest, I had no idea was Williams, and that was The Terminal.
Oh, right.
If
the,
anybody's
Tom
seen
I
Hanks
did not
movie.
know that at the time.
Me neither.
And I after
I don't even
listening
remember
to
I've
the
seen that
theme,
movie.
Is
Tom
Tom Hanks?
Hanks.
No, I
stuck
know
in
the
an airport?
movie. I just don't remember. I don't think I've watched it.
it was great because Tom Hanks' character is an Eastern European who came to New York, and you don't find this till later in the movie, so more spoilers. He came to New York to get the signature of a specific jazz musician. And he's been collecting all these different signatures of all these jazz musicians because his father did so. And he's stuck in a terminal because his country doesn't exist anymore.
It's the most
While he
ridiculous
was in,
plot.
While
while
he was in
he
air.
was in the air, there was a coup, and his country folded, and they became a new country while he was in the air. So he
And he
was a
wasn't allowed to
citizen
leave.
of nowhere.
And the main theme throughout this whole movie is based off of Tom Hanks' character. It's a combination of jazz and what you can consider Eastern European typical, almost military style. And it's amazing duality between the two because it's just astoundingly blended.
Yeah, and that's something kind of unique for him. Again, he doesn't always... We've already established he kind of sticks toward the more general themed blockbusters. Not that there's anything, uncomplex about things like E.T. and and Jurassic Park. But still, in the end, they're very accessible. Like,
Yeah.
I would say that The Terminal is a little bit more akin to an independent film.
Yes, absolutely.
More close to an IFC
Totally.
or Sundance
Certainly.
kind of thing. For that, he may have equally been a little bit out of his element, but this just goes to show he's incredibly flexible.
And versatile.
And
Yeah.
versatile. Yeah.
I mean, I think kind of what we're getting at is that this is not a critique of John Williams, because the scope of John Williams is so ridiculous, and the reality is he's a 5-star composer. The overall catalog,
The overall catalog, everything
just-
he's ever done, 5.
well, it's just I mean, I'm sure we can find flaws if we took a fine-tooth comb, but the reality is he knows movies, and that's what he does mostly, and he's crafted a skill and an ability that's unlike any other composer out now.
He has esoteric ideas and familiar nature, but every single thing he does, it's not boring. It's not tired. It always, even familiar pieces seem fresh and new
And engaging.
and just at times mouth-watering, at times alluring. It's amazing the variety that, not just the movies he works with, but the variety of what he can just make a single sound like.
Yeah.
And then there's just the amount of work that goes into being a composer.
Right.
The meticulous nature of making sure every single section falls in its place, every little note falls in its place, every little chord aligns the way you want it to align. It's probably one of the most meticulous jobs I can think of. And yet, all the while, as scientific as it can be sometimes, you need to maintain your artistic integrity throughout. That's the real amazing thing there.
And the most interesting thing with him is he becomes his own commodity, because in many cases, while you might get, certainly in the modern world where things are licensed out, you might get the license to one of the movies, but if you want to use his music, you need a separate license to
Yeah.
acquire that
Well,
as
the idea that, like, for example, Lego has made a career in the last decade of making video games based on Lego versions of movies, and
Or just intellectual
Or
property.
or pop culture.
And so they did one of the first big Lego games they did in the early Xbox generation was Lego Star Wars.
Yeah.
That was the first.
It was the first. And the Lego Star Wars game had the entire John Williams score.
Yeah,
and they
because-
had to license it separately.
Well, if you're gonna do Star Wars,
You need the music.
Yeah, that's kind of part and parcel, yeah.
I'll take one other. Again, it's not a critique necessarily, but it's something to think about. You're comparing John Williams stuff against, the independent artists who release their own work for the sake of their own work. It's. I would almost make the claim that John Williams does have a little bit of a leg up because he is, after all, given the pitch. It's just like you said. He is a visionary for what he's given. Again, I don't really know too much of what he's released outright. The closest thing, he'll come up with themes. For instance, he came up with the NBC theme, right, for their NBC News tonight,
Which is also so iconic.
That's again incredibly iconic. But still, he's given the criteria of we want something newsy, sounds kind of serious, sounds very sincere to
Yeah.
the public. They want serious news.
Yeah.
We're not trying to BS anybody here. These are all ideas that he's given to stew around within his head. And then he's a translator. He can make that into something that people can recognize.
Right.
I don't know if he's come up with things that he's written just for this. I'm sure he has, but his career is bent around the ideas that he's given. It's a trade for that reason.
Sure.
It warrants the same amount of talent, the same kind of thing, but in terms of visionary, you just need to make that distinction between those
Right.
two different types of visionaries.
Well, and the realistic thing is what Nate said. He's a commodity. He is
Yes.
absolutely a product now.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And one of the biggest in music history as far as scoring goes. I mean,
Exactly.
he's done
He
so
also,
much on
but for
scoring.
that reason, he also can't run the risk. We often run to this issue when we're going through discographies of different bands. We come across this album, we want to rate it fine, but then we're looking at their previous work, and we got to be like, they really went downhill.
Right.
Considering their previous thing. Well, that was a completely new project for them, new
Yeah.
and visionary, and yet some people are holding them to their old standard. Some people are holding them to a go new, give us something fresh and original, that kind of standard. And in the end, well, where are they supposed to fall?
Yeah.
Who are they supposed to listen to? Again, all they can listen to is themselves, and some people are going to love it for them, some people are going to hate them for it. John Williams can only be original because of new original people that he meets, giving him new and original ideas.
Yeah.
It kind of keeps his mind fresh. He's 81 years old. If that is any more of an explanation, I don't know what is.
I'm putting this out there on the air. Don't know when we're going to do it, but eventually we are going to do a Star Wars month where for 3 weeks, each week we will do each soundtrack of the original trilogy. We will review...
It would probably be auxiliary to the podcast.
Right.
I imagine.
But I want to do the Star Wars soundtrack. It's one of the most iconic sci-fi soundtracks of all time. And I would like to sit down and actually go through it. Try and find flaws.
That's right.
I'm
That's
curious.
the thing about this. This is almost like an intro. This today. This is John Williams' work at a glance, and just why certain things work, why certain things don't. Of course, to really know,
and
we
there
gotta
are
get
other
back to what we do best.
And there are other composers that we want to talk about as well, like Danny Elfman and Hans Zimmer.
I would actually like to do the entire Lord of the Rings work thus far.
And who did that?
How many days do you have?
Uh,
I mean,
True.
because you are going to need 24 hours per soundtrack.
Yeah, pretty much.
but as a
I'll be
suggestion,
10,000 days old.
a
when I'm
suggestion
27.
for Star Wars, I think it might be better to space them off like once every month, every other
Not
month,
do them all back to
and
back.
actually do all 6 movies leading up to the newest.
Of
in
the ones that are
2015.
coming. That's not bad. We could do that. Sprinkle it over the next year.
Ideas out there.
But we would have to do Star Wars, Empire, Return, and then go back to the prequels.
Right.
and do
The
that.
order of which they were made.
John,
not
the mic is standing right there.
Oh.
Now we're held to that.
Yeah, well, no, I think we should do it.
I think we can.
I'll do the math to figure out what, because I don't know when the movie's
Now,
coming
he
out.
said it.
sorry, are we going to do the... I'm including myself all of a sudden.
You are welcome.
You're more than welcome.
This is going to be
Something that-
auxiliary. I'm assuming you know Star Wars.
That's
I think
why
we
you're
might
here
have
today.
you on
Pop
for
culture.
that.
I might
John
know
is
a
pop
little bit
culture.
of Star... There's a possibility I might know a little bit to everything about Star Wars. I don't know everything.
It's somewhere
but
in there.
I know many things. But are we finding the original trilogy? That is the original theatrical release soundtrack.
My father has all of them on vinyl.
I love your father all of a sudden. Because unfortunately they only released in recent times the special edition. So if you want the wonder that is the Yub Nub song, you're stuck without it.
I actually have the original theatrical soundtracks
Good.
as well
All
on
right.
CD.
I need
Oh,
copies.
great.
I'm envious of all of you. I do not
Yeah.
have this stash in my house. It's very
I need
weird things.
I need copies of at least Return of the Jedi because I would like having Lopty Neck and which is of course the original Size Noodle song, and Celebrate the Love or the Yub Nub song depending on.
Yup, nub.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'll take that
Jeez,
too.
yo, whoa.
Yep.
I'll take that also.
Yeah.
So we have
We don't have the rights to
a little
that.
business transaction going on.
I don't know if that actually counts because it isn't. It's only sort of lyrics. It's in a foreign language.
Also, this week, no spam. We're spam-free week.
Oh, no, I do have a spam.
Oh, do you? I
Yeah.
thought you hadn't pulled one up.
Yeah, the spam is question mark.
Did we really get a spam comment that was just a question mark?
Yes, and you know who it's by?
Who?
2 question marks.
Really?
Yeah.
How do you make that an email address?
Interesting.
That's kind of ridiculous.
It's
Yeah, I
the
don't know
Riddler.
how they made that an email address. That's a really good question, but
That-
that's what was there.
That's skill.
Yeah.
That's
That is
thinking
skill.
outside the box right there.
Hell, I'll
that's
even
really-
give you a bonus. There was another spam that was 5 question marks.
And what was that by?
10 question marks? I shit you not. And I think there might have been a space between like the 7th and the 8th question mark.
Why? Wait, why there?
Because silence, when used properly,
I'm gonna punch John.
I'm not asking.
Hey guys,
why.
you want to know what it sounds like when I punch John? He's held his hand up. All right.
He made a
So
point.
as we're wrapping up, I want to thank Nate for joining us for this
My
episode.
pleasure.
We will definitely have you back for more pulp culture concerns. I definitely want to get into some of the modern composers too, because I really do love the Dark Knight soundtrack, and eventually want to talk about
and I'm a
it.
huge fan of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. As
They
well as
had
The
great
Hobbit
music as well. Well, the
and
theme for
music
Lord of the
for it.
Rings, yeah, sure.
And I think The Hobbit was probably even a stronger soundtrack.
Some of the earlier soundtracks, again, we would like to do an auxiliary podcast for.
Sure.
But, and try to keep modern as we go.
Our-
It's just such a shame because
Our
there's
goal
a
in the
rich
future,
history
when we
there.
have this thing they call free time, we're going to do additional podcasts. So if we happen to miss a week, we can throw stuff in. So the idea is to maybe do some of those for that, and we would love to have you back, Nate, for our Star Wars one, of course.
I'm
Yes.
always happy to come. You guys are great, and I do so enjoy doing this podcast.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us, John. We interrupted the flow, but your pick is next.
Okay, next week we're going into dub techno electronica.
Oh dear.
Oh no. Mind
This is an album
blown,
by...
ears bleeding.
This is an album I found. I kind of stumbled upon it, and I kind of fell in love with the tones of it.
It's the auditory version of a toothache.
Maybe.
So what's the band?
The band is one word, Deep Chord, and the album is Sommer.
Okay.
All right.
Okie dokie.
Also, a real quick shout out. I want to thank Schaefer the Dark Lord. I hung out with him for his birthday at his show the other day and introduced me to a fellow rapper who opened for him named Hops, who will actually be our guest in January. And also, it's official. I've booked it. The return of Nelson Lugo. He's coming back on the podcast
I'll
December
get
9th.
to meet him.
He's coming back on the podcast. He's going to join us on December 9th. It'll go up the week of December 9th. John actually gets to meet him this time. He's going to bring his own album, so he won't have to be lost with an album we've chosen. He's actually going to bring one of his own.
One
And
question about this rapper named Hops. Is Hops hip?
he is, actually.
So he's a hip hops.
He is.
All right. Well, that's in line.
I thought
with
perhaps he
everything
was
I
a beer
believe.
The
fan.
hip hop and don't
Could be
stop
both.
the bang,
He
bang,
did
bang,
drink
set
beer
up
during
the
his set.
movie.
But and then we're working on
For
some guests
conversation.
for February and
I'm
March.
singing.
So yeah, so you have that to look forward to. So I hate to put you on the spot, Nate. Do you remember our sign off?
No. Not off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
Then that's
We'll
fine.
do it down the line. Music.
Is
Life.
Finally. No.
And life is.
This was a train wreck.
I'm sorry.
Storm
I'm
made us off.
Yes, music is life, and life is good.